Welcome to Hey, Great Shot. This is the Great Shot Podcast, a Cracked Racquets and Tennis Channel Podcast Network production. My name is Alex Gruskin. We are so excited here at Cracked Racquets to be launching our newest show. It's called The Deciding Point. And of course, over the past few seasons, we have covered the college tennis world at depth. We have had so many fantastic discussions with Power 5 coaches over the past offseason. You can find all of those conversations, of course, on our Cracked Interviews podcast feed. We've been fortunate enough to do a weekly show on the men's side over the past few seasons. We've been fortunate enough to call the National Indoor Championships. I was fortunate enough to be on the NCAA Championship call as well. We thought we'd tighten up the ship here in 2022. We thought we'd take our game to the next level, up our video quality moving forward as well. And so that's what we're going to do each and every week of the 2022 college tennis season, rather than just offer you a podcast recapping all the action happening across the tennis world. We thought we'd pivot to video as well, make it an entire video production, incorporate the graphics, incorporate the outstanding work of super producer Daniel Westoff that much further. And of course, cover what should be another fantastic college tennis season. And as we all know, what's this weekend? The ceremonial start of the 2022 calendar year. It's the ITA Kickoff Weekend. We've got 15 regions on the men's side, 15 regions on the women's side, 60 teams total competing for those final 15 spots at the National Indoor Championships. Of course, on today's show, what are we going to do? We're going to break down Kickoff Weekend. We're going to talk about the regions you should be watching most closely. We'll offer our locks for the weekend to advance, talk about the best of the rest, the hosts on Upset Alert, and so much more. Of course, before we do that, we'll have to start our show with another batch of results from the opening few weekends. Not the ceremonial start, but certainly college tennis is underway here in 2022. We already had our Cracked Racquets preseason #1 team fall. Cal knocking off Pepperdine in a dramatic 4-3 victory. Of course, we got to talk about that match here on today's show. Of course, we got to talk about all the action happening down in North Carolina. NC State, Duke, phenomenal weekends. Is the ACC just as dominant this year as they were last? We'll explore that on today's show before we get into our kickoff weekend, and then a fun announcement at the end as well. And of course, joining me to discuss all of these things, one of the people you would want to help preview an event with the magnitude of the ITA Kickoff Weekend. Of course, you already know him as your co-favorite writer on our website, crackedrackets.com, founder of the No Ad, No Problem blog, the man who helped me count down from preseason number 10 to preseason #1 on our Great Shot podcast feed, previewing this 2022 college tennis season, is my friend, John J. Parsons. Jay, hey, great shot. Welcome to the deciding point, my friend. Are you excited for a kickoff weekend?
I'm extremely excited. Great job buttoning up the production. My impact, I have to say. I joined the team and things are at next level. But yeah, super excited to be here. Super excited to do this weekly with you. I think video is an awesome idea. Really looking forward to it. And we have so much to discuss, right? Already, matches have happened. Kickoff weekend coming up. There's a lot happening in the tennis world. So excited to dive in.
Yeah, we try to wear a bunch of different hats. I only wear the one hat, but the metaphorical hats here at Cracked Racquets. And to balance the Australian Open, particularly on the weekend, these college tennis matches, because of the drama pushing into 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. Eastern time, I was like, come on. I was like, I got to switch hats here. I got to turn on the pro tennis gear. And, again, even though we haven't even reached the kickoff weekend, parity is going to be the name of the game once again this season, if the first 2 weeks are any indication. And to your point, something you touched on, I probably should have done a better job, but I was trying to tighten the ship in that intro. The reason we've pivoted to video as well, and to all of you who have already commented here on our stream, we greatly appreciate that fact. We want to make this interactive. Of course, I think we all know intuitively what the biggest storylines are in the college tennis world, but we want to hear from you, the college tennis fan. What do you want us to be covering? Are there people or things we aren't talking about frequently enough that you think we should be discussing? Of course, we want to hear your takes on the latest and greatest action happening across the college tennis world as well. So as Jay mentioned, every week throughout the 2022 college tennis season, 9 p.m. Eastern time, 6 p.m. Pacific, Jay and I will be right here, super producer Daniel Westoff, on the ones and twos. We'll try to incorporate some fun things as we move throughout the season. Obviously, it's a kickoff weekend. I think you all know what we have to cover on today's show, but yeah, we plan to have some fun on this throughout the course of the year. With all of that said, Jay, we got a lot to talk about today. So let's get into it. Let's start with the weekend results. How can we accurately preview what we expect to happen this weekend without reflecting upon what we just saw occur? I think the place we have to start is with the win by the Cal Bears. For them to knock off Pepperdine this early in the season, do it in the fashion that they did, a 4-3 victory over Pepperdine in a match where Pepperdine takes the doubles point. And we have yet to release our number one college contenders on Pepperdine, but just so all of you listeners get a little sneak peek, Jay and I rave about the Pepperdine Waves. When I say rave, I mean, you guys can see us all now. We essentially did that Zoom topless. It was that exciting, and we were just lathered up in these Pepperdine Waves. And obviously, right away, pour that cold bucket of ice water on us because, you see these Cal Bears, a team we had left out of our preseason top 10. I would point out we did not know about some of the late additions to their roster that would come, and we discussed that on our podcast as well. But you look at what this Cal Bears team was able to do to overcome dropping the doubles point, to not get a win at the number one singles position from Haley Giovara, who is not the only talent on their roster, but is certainly the talent we were most sure about heading into this season for them, to really, sweep the bottom four. I mean, when we talked about Pepperdine, we said they had 6 number ones, and Cal sweeps the bottom four, Jay. Not the result we were expecting to start the season.
Not at all. I think we had, pinpointed this as this is going to be a great match. We're going to learn a lot about Cal. We're going to learn a lot about Pepperdine. Did not have that on my bingo card, particularly the way that Pepperdine won doubles so easily. This was a match that was in Malibu. It was extremely windy. If anyone tuned into the live stream, you had to turn your volume down. Like, you could noticeably hear how loud it was. And I immediately thought that would definitely favor Pepperdine, given they're more familiar with those environments. But yeah, we also said that, hey, you could take Pepperdine's top 8, roll them out in any order, and, you feel pretty good about getting 3 wins. No one's going to get 4. Cal goes on the road, bad conditions, down a doubles point. They got smacked in doubles, down a big doubles point. And they come out and they take 3 through 6, which was extremely surprising. Pepperdine did not look their best. There were a few positions I was watching in particular where it seemed like, whether it was the nerves of a Pepperdine debut or the windy conditions, where it just felt like Cal was playing the conditions better, playing the moment better. And ultimately, I mean, you had a January admit in Katja Wiersholm clinch at number 5.
Yeah, and it's even beyond that. You look for Alsola at 3, who knocks off Vicky Flores. Alsola's a freshman, and to win that match 3-6, didn't even go the distance. She takes care of business there. And, at 6, that's a sophomore for Cal, taking on a freshman in Savannah Brodus. And I will say this, Savannah Brodus at 6 now is not the Savannah Brodus we'll see come May. Obviously, the highly esteemed freshman still acclimating herself to the dual match environment, to the pressures that come with everything. And of course, it is worth mentioning no Pashkaleva, who we last saw in the national championship match playing just a stunning 4-3 match against Lulu Sun. She was not on the court for these Pepperdine Waves, and Janice Chen, who was injured in the fall, and we didn't get to see much of. She's still working her way back to health, but bottom four, I think when we play the game of, does this tell you more about Pepperdine or do you learn more about Cal, though? I think the answer has to be you learn more about the Cal Bears, because it's an early season loss, and that happens. And even for an experienced team, this is a wake-up call for Pepperdine as they look towards the kickoff weekend. But to your point, you look at how the doubles unfolded. 6-2 for Brodus and Chen at 1. 6-love for Fukuda and Amachkine at number 2. And by the way, if you're a long-term Pepperdine fan, you want to do the glass half full take, they won the doubles point. If they're winning doubles point, don't worry. Come May, they'll be fine. But this tells you about the fight that this still young Cal team already has.
Yeah, and initially without Pachkaleva, you say, okay, that's someone that would start in their top 6, but we've talked about this before. Take anyone out, you still feel good about them winning at least 3 singles matches. Also worth noting, though, Cal didn't have Jada Bowie, who played middle of their lineup last season, had some good results in the fall. So it wasn't a full Cal team either. So it definitely tells you a lot more about Cal, whose season, last year was pretty restricted with some of the Pac-12 restrictions. Obviously had a tough match against North Carolina in the round of 16. So, things are looking up for Cal. And I'm excited to see them play a full season and get to know a lot of their players better. Because as you mentioned, it's still a very young team. And we didn't get a lot of them on the national stage last year. So they've clearly come to play in 2022.
Yeah, and the good news about this Cal team is we're going to get to see them tested. Not only are they host to a tricky kickoff weekend, which we will talk about later, but, Texas is coming to town later in the year, and I believe they play UCLA in a non-conference matchup as well. And just, again, this team's going to get tested. It's going to be fun to see how they compete, and certainly conference-wise, UCLA, USC, Pepperdine, Stanford.
Well, they get Pepperdine again.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's Pepperdine one more time, not UCLA one more time. See, this is why it's always great to have you on here, Jay. This Cal team was excellent. I mean, again, when you look at the lineup for Pepperdine, because let's just put this at a final thought. Over under 26 and a half permutations for Pear this year, as he looks to find who should play at 1, who should play at 6.
In singles?
Yeah, just in singles.
Under.
Yeah, but he could do that, right? Like, I feel like you could play Russian roulette and just be like, all right, today it's Flores at 1. Today it's Brodus at 4. Like, I feel like that's the goal by the end of the season, certainly.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Cal feels similar too, right? They have a lot of parity within kind of their middle of the lineup. Giovara is going to play 1, and maybe you're a little less certain on who plays 1 for Pepperdine, but 2 through 6, even last season, you saw a lot of fluctuation. So I expect to see a lot of fluctuation on the Cal lineup as well, particularly in that kind of 2 through 5 area. So these are 2 teams that feel very similar across the board, right? You don't always have that on teams. You sometimes have pretty clear tiers within the lineup. Both of these teams feel like they have the luxury to play around and find the ideal lineup.
Yeah, and so we will see more of them. Certainly big confidence boosting win for the Cal Bears. This is not the last. We will see if Pepperdine, who plays just about everyone this season, Per Nilsson, certainly going to make diamond on his Delta flight plan. But with that in mind, let's move on to our next region. And I want to talk about what happened over in North Carolina over the course of the weekend, in particular, what Duke and NC State were able to accomplish. Let's start with the Blue Devils. 4-3 victory on Friday over Ohio State, 4-2 victory over Princeton on Sunday. It was, I want to start with the Friday victory over the Buckeyes, because what was so fascinating right off the bat, obviously we talked about the importance of the doubles point for Duke in our preseason preview of them. All of these preseason podcasts, by the way, available on our website, crackrackets.com, or on the Great Shot podcast feed. We talked about how good they were in doubles last year and how so frequently they found a match calculus of doubles, 2, 3, and 4 singles. And when you lose your number 4 singles, how are you going to replace that calculus this year? And you lose some of your doubles pairings as well. How do you replace those? Well, Duke was able to do that over the course of this weekend. And, for them, whether it was back in Billiken getting a big 7-6 win to clinch that doubles point at number 1, and then Kelly Chen at number 4 singles, Jay. Kelly Chen, who was top 5 in the country, I want to say, in 2020 when things were stopped by the pandemic, at number 4 singles, clinches a 3-set victory for her team over the Buckeyes. Again, let's just start here. Good win for this Duke team, certainly. Good experience for the freshmen who, not the best day for them on the singles court, but still, I thought this was a really good win for this Blue Devil team.
It was a huge win. I think it was a surprise, at least for me, to see Chen at 4. I think we thought we were going to have our top 3. And
a surprise, a shock, a shock. She goes from 1 last season playing well at 1 to 4. That is not something Coach Ashworth pulling out of the Ty Tucker playbook.
Well, she definitely struggled at 1. I don't know, playing well. But it was going to be, I think, Drummy and Beck I think I had thought Chen would play 3. And so it's really a testament to the success of the freshman. We had talked about this on the Duke pod, the fall success that Emma Jackson had, right? So for her to go up to 3, maybe we thought that would come later in the season. So a really good win off the bat for this Duke team, who's looking to establish themselves with a lot of new faces as well. We'll get into this, but I think that the player of the weekend probably has to go to Drummy. That was a really good win over Irina Kontos of Ohio State. We'll get to her win against Princeton as well, but some really good victories that they put on the board and really demonstrating the strength that they continue to have at the top of the lineup in both Drummy and Beck.
Well, I think it's the core 3 and the returning 3 who get the job done here. And that's so critical for this Duke team early in the season. And we talked about how the experience of Drummy, of Beck, of Chen would provide a crutch to this team early in the season to lean on. They did that against Ohio State. And you can see the reaction on your screen of Kelly Chen clinching that in that moment to get the early confidence boosting win. Again, that's big for the Blue Devils. We'll talk about their region later on. But as you mentioned, you transition over to the Princeton match as well. It was a repeated effort from that core. You look for Duke, they drop the doubles point, against Princeton, 1-0 deficit. And still, like, once again, it's Drummy who, you're right, has to be the player of the weekend to beat Kontos and to beat ITA Fall National finalist Daria Freeman of Princeton, number 4 in the country right now, beat her in straight sets. And then, Kelly Chen battling, but this, on this day, it's Emma Jackson getting the win at 4 and Billiken coming into the lineup, getting the win at 6. I like that, again, match number 1, let's lean on the returners. Match number 2, some other people have to step up. They did that. It's a good weekend for the Blue Devils.
It is. I think to have Drummy and Beck go 2-0 on both their singles wins back to back against very good competition, particularly Princeton, right? Their top 2 can hang with anyone, with Freeman and Hugh at the top of the lineup. So for Drummy and Beck to get both of those victories, it's probably going to be pretty similar to what Duke had to do last year, where they really need to rely on those 2 points, and then they need to find potentially 1, maybe 2 others if they don't get the doubles point. I think it was a little bit of a concern seeing some of the places that they drop singles matches in the bottom of the lineup, because that's an area that they need to shore up. But overall, really good weekend for the top of the lineup. The question remains around the bottom half.
Well, I think there's a kernel of positivity for Emma Jackson, the freshman, who loses at number 3 against Ohio State, comes back, gets a win at 4 over Bonetto of Princeton on day number 2. And again, for any freshman, we talked about it with Savannah Brodus as well, they're going to be much better, much more experienced, much more calloused come May than they are now. And I know we see some comments from all of you. We appreciate all of you sending those comments. We'll get to our ITA Kickoff Weekend as soon as we run through these results. But one of them asked, and we were going to get to this eventually. We can do this now since we're talking about this Princeton team. 0-4 start for a Princeton Tiger team that certainly has a ton of talent. And let's be clear, the Ivy League hasn't competed since February, like early March of 2020. And yeah, they got to play the fall, but no dual match season, no anything for them in 2020, 2021. And now we get into the fall or into the spring, and you look at this team on paper, a lot of talent. That top 3, Freeman, Hu, Schvetz, they can compete. We still got to learn more about who's going to be 4, who's going to be 5, who's going to be 6, fill out the rest of this roster. And again, not an easy start scheduling wise. They go play Oklahoma. They, play Duke. They play NC State. I'm forgetting one in there,
Oklahoma
but it's
State.
yeah. Thank you. Oklahoma State as well. They double up in both of these trips, and yeah, they go 0-4. But they played all 4 matches tight, Jay. So we get an ask from Sports Fanatics, exclamation point on the Fanatics. He's just not a fanatic. He's a fanatic. I don't think there's any panic meter. Like, if anything, this is what you knew might happen with the scheduling. Now, 500 rule wise, I think they're still going to be okay. But I was actually pretty impressed with the way they competed, given how long it's been.
Certainly, right. And they just snuck in to be eligible March 2020. Their last match was March 1st, 2020. Yeah. So it's been a while, right? And just you talk to anyone, just the rhythm of a dual match is, it takes some getting used to. They're going to have a lot of players who have either had very minimal experience or haven't had any at all. So you expect for them to be rusty coming out of the gate. I thought they did compete really well. It is disappointing that they go 0-4. I do think that that will hurt them long term, particularly in the rankings. Looking at their schedule, there aren't a ton of other opportunities unless they really do well this kickoff weekend to get some of those ranked wins that they'll need to be a top 16 seed, of which I think they are talented enough to be. So I think the 0-4 is not necessarily disappointing from, do you feel worse about Princeton, but just from a ranking standpoint and what that could mean for their postseason, that's probably where it hurts them.
Certainly, as an Ivy League team, you got to rack up those ranked wins. And when you have the opportunity, they put themselves in this position for their opportunity. And you're right. When you look back, if they're not a top 16 seed, you'll point to the fact that they went 0-4, that in Oklahoma snaked them in particular, or that, in Ohio State, I think Ohio State, NC State's a sort of different story. Duke and NC State's a different story. But yeah, this was certainly a moment for this Princeton team. Now you look on the fourth team in this quad here, Ohio State, 4-3 for them against Duke, 4-3 for them against NC State, which is where I want to go next. If we can, super producer Daniel Westoff, let's talk about the NC State Wolfpack, who, Simon Earnshaw pulled the fast one on us. He knows he did that. He knew that he could have it was low hanging fruit for him to just let us in. And then when people ask, oh, why do you have NC State in your top 10? We can say, well, we're filled in. We know what you guys don't. But he didn't do that. No. And thus we seem a bit behind the eight ball. That said, it was a prove it sort of weekend for NC State to get the 4-3 win over Ohio State, and in the fashion that they did as well, for them to just, again, take the doubles point comfortably, earn victories for them at 4, at 5, at 6. How often do we say it's depth that wins championships and separates these teams at the top of the rankings? And of course, you look for them against Princeton as well. They take the doubles point once again, and it's wins for them at 3, at 4, at 5. It's the returners to this NC State team, Jada Daniel and Rincelli, who at the top of the lineup, and yet it's the newcomers getting the job done. If you're head coach Simon Earnshaw, not only did you get the wins, which you always celebrate, but to get the wins in this fashion, I think this is about as ideally as it could have been scripted for the Wolfpack.
Yeah, it was a great weekend for them. In many ways, despite NC State and Duke both going 2-0, they did it in very different fashion, right? Yeah. NC State actually lost the top 2 in both of their matches and was able to get it done in the spots that you mentioned, those kind of 3, 4, 5, and 6 spots. So I thought that was a really good performance from them. The absence of Alana Smith hurts. And if you tuned into the stream, you could see her in a boot wheeling around, going 0-2 at the top spots in both of those matches, right? You prefer to have Jada Daniel and Rincelli at 2 and 3. So that will be a question, I think, moving forward. How healthy can Alana Smith be? When can she get back in the lineup? She'll obviously be a huge asset for them in doubles. Looks like they didn't need it this weekend, but of course they'll need that moving forward. But overall, for them to get those 2 ranked wins is going to pay dividends down the road.
Yeah, and again, Freeman splits her matches on the weekend, and I believe Vicky Hu splits her matches. Schvetz was up on the weekend as well. That top 3 of Princeton is very good, so there's no shame in those losses for this NC State team. But you're right, for them, last year they were so good at doubles, so excellent at doubles, and they were up 1-0 in just about every match they played until they ran up against Texas in those semifinals. And to see this team have some success early in the season in doubles, I think that's critical for them going into the kickoff weekend. And boy, you think each and every one of the teams in NC State's region, Northwestern, Wake Forest, Iowa State, is like, can we get a redo? Like, this is kind of ridiculous. Like, he can add, what do we do with, we didn't draft with this knowledge in mind. But no, I agree with you. I think for this NC State team, again, to get the ranked wins over Ohio State in particular, because you look for the ACC, it's crowded at the top as always. You've got a North Carolina program that's not going anywhere. You've got Duke, you've got, this NC State team, you've got other teams chomping at the bit as well, and Virginia, and obviously Wake Forest has put together a good fall, and just all of these schools, the depth, you can go on and on and on. I'm sure I'm missing some schools here. We know what Georgia Tech's done the past few seasons. This was big for NC State. Now on the flip side, 2 4-3 losses for the Buckeyes. If you're Coach Schaub, you're just kicking yourself.
Yeah, but this is why you schedule the matches, right? 100%. To give your a chance to play Duke and NC State. Smart scheduling, go out of conference. If you get one of those, that's a massive victory. So yeah, it's tough to go 4-3, particularly in some of those matches, where they had opportunities. But ultimately, I think, she needs to take away some positives. I thought Coley Allen got a few victories in singles. I thought that was really good. Boulay got wins. Like, a lot of the pieces are starting to form back together, where we had a lot of questions about those players in the fall. So ultimately, it's a great test for them. They'll continue to get tested against some of the Big 12. Hopefully, if they get through the regional, they'll get more matches for opportunities to get some of those ranked wins. But you schedule tough, you're going to have some tough losses.
No, our lineup decision of the week would probably be at number 6 singles for the Buckeyes, where against Duke, they play Luna Dormant, the veteran returner. Ton of success for her last season. She gets the victory for them. She does not play at 6. They play Berezniak at 6 against NC State. NC State able to get the win. Now, I'm not saying you regret that decision. That's, to your point, exactly why you scheduled these sorts of matches. But that's just an interesting thing to note as we look towards the kickoff weekend, because, again, the Buckeyes, loaded weekend in Columbus that, of course, we'll talk about momentarily. Before we get to that ITA kickoff weekend, and we are right around the corner there, any other results that caught your eye you want to mention from the past weekend?
I think we talked about the main dual matches, right? The weekend before, we had a lot of tournament play. This past weekend, it was really those top matches that we talked about, the North Carolina region, Cal.
Yeah, I got 2 more for you, if I may.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
So South Carolina, Oklahoma. Good win for Oklahoma once again. To get a 5-2 victory for them over South Carolina. Gained some momentum for Oklahoma as they head to Duke this weekend. And now they've beaten Princeton. And, now they've earned a good, again, win over an SEC team in South Carolina. And it's worth noting, for Sarah Hamner, who goes, she looked dominant 2-2 over Corley at number 1. That's another fantastic victory for the Gamecock freshman. But this Oklahoma team, and you corrected me, it's the depth for them. They sweep 2 through 5, and they get the 4 singles victories that they need to add on to that doubles point that they look better and better at this season. This Oklahoma team's good.
Yeah, and they're still good without Guzman. Right.
Yeah.
So that's something to note. It was disappointing that the South Carolina scheduled the same Oklahoma trip that Princeton did. And unfortunately, their match with Oklahoma State was canceled because of COVID protocols. So that was a disappointment. But yeah, this Oklahoma is starting out real strong. We'll talk about where they are in the ITA kickoff weekend, because that's a juicy matchup. But overall, I think Oklahoma has a lot of options at 4, 5, and 6 that will line up well against anybody.
Yeah, the other one I would throw out there, good victory for the Tennessee Volunteers going into kickoff weekend as well. They're in that Buckeye region, and they get a good win over Wake Forest 4-3, a match where they drop the doubles point but are able to find 4 singles victories. That's exactly why are these schedules loaded in weekend 1 and weekend 2 of the seasons, because their team coaches want to put their teams in these scenario. I noticed what the Volunteers were able to accomplish, and it's just right now something in the water in Knoxville. I mean, the Tennessee men, it's 4-3 win after 4-3 win. Tennessee women, 4-3 win. They're doing something right. No air conditioning still at the Indoor Center in Knoxville, which, like, what year is it? But, you got to love it if you are a Tennessee fan. So those are the results from weekend number 1. And of course, I have to give a massive shout out to our friend Chris Halioris, who has the best feature in all of college tennis, the College Week Behind tab, where you can go look at all of the results from the past week, the week ahead, where you can see the schedule ahead. With that in mind, let's talk about that schedule ahead. Let's preview this weekend's ITA kickoff weekend action. 15 regions across the country. And just a reminder to any of you fans who forget how this works, at the end of the year, come, let's say, early June or mid-June, early July, we get that ITA kickoff weekend draft. Well,
way too early.
Now that are we doing this now? Is it?
Yeah. You brought it up.
Yeah, haven't we done this already? Yeah, it's early, especially with all the late editions, right? You would think, but of course, logistically, flight plans got to lock it in, try to lock everything in as early as possible. Jay, the good news is we're on video now, so hopefully, all of you listeners who listen to this in podcast form will go see the disregard Jay has for my opinion on this issue. But
I have a solution. Just have the host site book out X number of hotel rooms. And you're telling me if you did the draft in December, 6-8 weeks ahead of travel, coaches couldn't book a few plane tickets?
Well, no comment. I think it's just about, again, logistically being able to organize everything as soon as possible. I agree. There's probably, you can go a little later, maybe September, maybe October, maybe not June. Just let's see how the enrolling goes. But Anyways, you have a kickoff weekend draft, and that kickoff weekend draft yields you the 15 regions we're playing. Of course, this year's National Indoor Championships being held at the beautiful Nielsen Tennis Center in Madison, Wisconsin. So the University of Wisconsin team gets an automatic bid into the final 16, but now we've got 60 teams competing for those final 15 spots, 15 regions, 4 teams a region. You had your 15 host sites. They're the top 15 teams that aren't the host site of the actual national championships in the ITA end of season drafts. Your host sites this year for the ITA Kickoff Weekend: Texas, North Carolina, Pepperdine, Georgia, UCLA, NC State, Florida State, Duke, Virginia, Georgia Tech, UCF, Ohio State, Cal, Baylor, Texas A&M. Now, obviously right there, that's 15 schools. You probably don't remember half that I just said. That's indicative of the fact that there are a lot of teams competing across the board this season. Now, we're going to break down all 60 of the teams on this show. No, we are not. What we're going to do now to break down these regions, again, is answer 4 questions for all of you. We'll talk about the most interesting region, the weekend we think you have to tune into throughout the course of this kickoff weekend play. We'll talk about the other most interesting. We'll talk about the other weekend locks that we have. Who are the top seeds we think are going to cruise? We'll talk about the hosts we think most likely to lose as the host sites here in these 15 regions. And then we'll talk about the best of the rest, of course, try to cover all 15 to some extent. Wouldn't be a preview podcast if we didn't offer predictions. So, of course, we will do that as well. With all of that said, Jay, let's get into it and talk about this ITA Kickoff Weekend, the ceremonial start of the 2022 season. Let's start with the most interesting region. There are a couple of nominees, I think, that pop out right away, and we've referred to them already. You look at Ohio State, who's hosting LSU, Tennessee, and Oklahoma State. That one, fascinating. You look at what was seemingly NC State, Northwestern, Wake Forest, and a surging, Iowa State team. That one's fascinating. Baylor, Miami, USC, Kansas, Georgia Tech, Michigan, Ole Miss, and Old Dominion. There's a lot of good stuff up and down the board. Ultimately, we decide on Texas A&M, South Carolina, Texas Tech, and Princeton. That's our most interesting region, Jay. Make the case as to why.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was one that we scheduled before, or we kind of circled once that draft 3 years ago was made. Because of Texas A&M and South Carolina, and the unknowns about Princeton. If anything, this region has gotten more interesting as we've started to know more about these 4 schools. I think first off, the addition of Carson Branstein, who did play number 1 singles in her collegiate debut for Texas A&M, makes that Texas A&M squad very interesting. So if we get a matchup with that in South Carolina, that's a kind of a marquee matchup. Sarah Hamna's rise, if you will, in the fall has made this region that much more interesting. The transfer of Ayanna Ackley to South Carolina, right? Their top 2, really interesting. We've talked a lot about Princeton, kind of the expectations on them. If anything, what makes this more interesting is, can they get the win, right? Can they get a few wins here? This is going to be one of their few opportunities to get non-conference ranked wins. And then last, you have Texas Tech, who's always a dangerous Big 12 team. They have a really strong number 1. You feel like they can get on the board in a few different places. So ultimately, I think just given the storylines here, I think it's the most interesting region.
I agree with you. And it's because there are so many unknowns about each of the teams entering this region. It's whether we just talked about Princeton and their 0-4 start to the season, and they've come very, very close, and they've gotten wins at different positions. But again, when you look at this region on paper, there's a potential for a Hamner-Freeman matchup at the number 1 single spot. How is that not extraordinarily intriguing? 2 of the top 5 players in the fall. And honestly, I still think 2 of the top 10 players once you factor everyone else in as well in the country. And yeah, what does Texas A&M look like? Again, Goldsmith, I think, was playing 4 singles 4, in that starting match. We had her penciled in for 2 in our Cracked Racquets preview. And I think a lot of teams now, knowing Branstein is a lock and that she is playing number 1 and playing healthy, not a lock to win, but a lock to be playing in the lineup this season. It's just an added dimension of depth. And so here's my question to you as we look at this region. Who's the deepest team, Jay? You look at the UTRs, the margins are pretty thin across the board.
I think you've got to go deepest team with Texas A&M. right? I mean, if you just look at their 2021 season, they actually did really well at the 4, 5, and 6 spots. I mean, Renee McBride, I think at 5 was almost undefeated in the SEC. So they have a lot of options. They brought in a large freshman recruiting class that includes Mary Stowana, who I think will probably play near the top of the lineup or at least middle. Several other freshmen. So if they go 7, 8, 9 deep, that the scales start to tilt pretty heavily in Texas A&M's favor. I think in terms of depth, that has been the question for Princeton and South Carolina, two teams that you feel really strong about at the very top of the lineup.
Now, on the flip side, because I would agree with you there, and no disrespect to Coach Petty and Texas Tech, who I think don't sell them short. They might be the most experienced team in this region, despite being young. Last year, they were extraordinarily young. This year, they bring the whole gang back. And so, again, that, as we learned this season, there is inherent value. Just look at the Duke victories to bringing back a core that has competed together. But on the flip side of the depth argument, who's got the best top threes? Because like Freeman and Schvetz for Princeton on paper, that's extraordinary. And then Hamner and Ackley, who lost at Oklahoma, but was certainly a top 25 player here this fall and a fantastic 2021 season. Like, I don't care who's at number 3. You feel pretty good about that top 2 against anyone. And then, whether it's Branstein and Makarova and whomever at the number 3 spot for this Texas A&M team, the top, because again, like, who's to say if Princeton if their top 3 play their best, and Schvetz was up on Kelly Chen 7-5 all when that match finished. And, who's to say they can't get a sweep from Schvetz, from Freeman, and all of a sudden you just got to find one more. This Princeton team is that good. That's why this, again, region is inherently fascinating. Like, I'm not saying I give them the edge, but I think Brianna Schvetz at her best is the best number 3 singles player. And how can you count out the rest of those top 2?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because I think it's not the depth that's interesting. It is like the match calculus for both a Princeton and a South Carolina team is to win at the top of the lineup and get doubles. Right. So health is probably a factor. We haven't seen Townsend play, I believe, in singles for Texas A&M yet. So that is an open question mark. So if you're South Carolina and Princeton, your recipe is your top 3, which we've talked about with Texas A&M, is a question mark, right? Makarova entered the season top 10, had a pretty disappointing fall. Who knows where Branstein's level is really at, right? Is she a top 10 player? Is she a top 50 player? So you feel really good if you're Princeton or South Carolina about taking those victories, and you kind of have to as well. But there's pathways, which is what makes this interesting.
Yeah, again, I think from a matchup perspective, this may have been a more fun region if you switch Texas Tech and Princeton. And I'm not saying, again, I still think every permutation is in play, right? Like, I think you're just as likely to see a Texas A&M versus who's the number 2 seed, I suppose, in this region. That would be South Carolina. I think you're just as likely to see Texas A&M, South Carolina, as you are to see Princeton versus Texas Tech and any of the combinations in either the winners or the losers bracket. That said, the Texas A&M team, the depth they have, 4, 5, 6, that's exactly what Princeton, I don't want to say lacks, but is most unknown about them at this point of the season. Similarly, for Texas Tech, while they have a lot of continuity at the bottom, you just feel like Hamner and Ackley may be prohibitive favorites at the top for South Carolina. And so it's kind of, unstoppable object means, or immovable object means unstoppable force. And so it's a fascinating region. Any lineup particulars you're looking most closely to that we haven't mentioned yet, or in general, give me the prediction. Who you got moving out of this one?
Yeah, so I think the one thing to note is that Princeton did play a fall invite at Texas A&M, so they do have some familiarity with the courts. I think that will be to their benefit. Ultimately, I have Texas A&M advancing on their home courts and making it to the indoor in Wisconsin.
I wanted to disagree with you at different points of this show. I don't even remember who I predicted at this point. And I was like, Westhoff, I was like, okay, he picked. Okay. I was like, but that was our number 9 preseason team. So that's continuity between the two of us. So I agree. I think I'm going to roll Aggies as well. I think Texas Tech is coming out of this region with a win. That's my hot take.
Ooh, okay, that's a hot take.
Yeah. And so I think Texas Tech is coming out of this region with a win. I think they can hang. Here's what I will also say, though. If Princeton goes 0-2 again here, 0-6 through the first 6, again, playing very similar matches across the board, I still don't know if that's a bad thing. It's like, all right, you got to get out a year and a half of losing because it's like you haven't played in a while. But I just think getting calloused up this early, like, I guess, would you hit the panic button if Princeton goes 0-2?
Panic isn't the right word. But I would try and schedule a few double headers or some cupcakes to just get the team some wins, right? This is a very aggressive scheduling, which you love to see, but it'd be tough to chart a pathway to having a really successful season if you start the season 0-6.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Well, then, with that said, that's our most fascinating region, but there are plenty of other interesting regions for us still to cover. Let's move now to our locks. And just, again, everyone wants to know, how are the top seeds going to do? Who are the contenders? Where should I be watching them play? Now, we have 4 tier 1 locks, if memory serves me correctly, 3 in the tier 2 category. It was interesting because I saw an initial draft of your list, Jay, and you had 5 tier 1s, and I was and I was going to disagree with you and say, are we so sure about lock number 5 in the tier 1 category? But you have subsequently moved them, and shout out to super producer Daniel Westoff, the best in the business at these graphics, putting them up. In our tier 1 category, we have the Texas Longhorns, your defending national champions, victors, hosting, Rice, SMU, Florida Atlantic. Let's just start there quickly. Any problems, or what are you looking for most closely for the Longhorns this weekend?
Just lineup and health, right? We did see Texas in action. We saw freshman Zainalova play. We saw Vivian Avrutsky play. Those are all good signs. So just kind of monitoring the health and the success of some of those freshmen. We know the known quantities of the returning sophomores.
Yeah, how do we get a Blair Henley bump to the Rice program? We're talking about Rice women's finest, Blair Henley. Why is she not on here right now? Come on, Blair. No, I think Texas Cruz is, again, It's just fascinating. Who plays where? What are the doubles combinations? It's early in the season still. We have a lot to learn. I agree with you as well. Number 2 on our lock list, the number 2 seed, North Carolina, playing host to Oregon, Tulsa, and Charlotte. We saw Charlotte compete this weekend. I believe they took a 7-0 loss, I want to say, to Tennessee over the course of the weekend. And so, again, Oregon, down Janice Chen, still plenty of talent out there in that Pac-12. Tulsa always in the mix as well. Still, even without Graham, David, first, because we had no Georgia match, by the way. That was something we were hoping to recap in our opening segment. Georgia, North Carolina, unfortunately postponed this past weekend. Yeah, we've seen flashes of the lineup, but still, Scotty, Crawley, Mora and Tanjulig and all, who am I missing here? Riley Tran. Were they all going to play? What's the lineup going to look like? What's the doubles lineup look like? Those are my questions. Anything else to add to this?
Nope. Those are the questions.
That's it. You're taking them straight up. Do they drop a point?
No.
Does Texas drop a point?
No.
Yeah. Welcome back to the college tennis season.
Because they play clinch here, right? So it's just going to be 4-0s.
No, and this is the beauty, by the way, of the 15 region spread. It's like last year, every match 4-3 after 4-3. It's just like it was chaos. There is a sense of normalcy. It's just great to be back to 15 regions competing. All right, that's your second lock. Third lock. Yeah, they lost this weekend. I think we both agree. Pepperdine Waves hosting Notre Dame, Colorado, Columbia. They're still prohibitive favorite.
Yep.
Nothing to add? Lineup questions?
Well, I am anticipating we'll see Patch Kaleva back in the lineup, so I'll be curious to see where she slots in. Curious to see where head coach Per Nilsson, if he makes additional changes based on that loss, this past weekend. But that's really it, just lineup monitoring.
And we'd call him Coach Nilsson, but Pear's just a great name.
It's a great name.
How are we not going to use Pear? And so, I agree with you. It's going to be interesting. Does Brodus stay in? Let her play through her lumps like that. I think that would be Pear's inclination always. And this weekend, here's my take. It's going to be 2 completely different lineups. No player, although it's national indoor, so you got to lock in those things.
Yeah.
I would say you get 3 changes between lineup 1 and lineup 2. That would be my guesstimate. Over under 2.5. What do you take?
I'll go over, right? Because they could switch 1 and 2, they could switch 3 and 4. So why not, right?
This is what I'm talking about, Jay. Now we're offering
keep everyone guessing. Keep other teams guessing.
I like it. All right. lock number 4. And, again, what was the cancellation from on the Carolina, Georgia side? How does that impact this weekend? That's still an unknown question, but Georgia, our 4th locks, the number 4 seeds playing host to Iowa, Mississippi State, and North Florida. A lot of changes for this Georgia team. Certainly the Jokic era has ended. That said, they bring in a ton of talented new players. They bring in, still a solid nucleus back as well. Any questions about their lineup?
Yeah, I mean, I think, based on their roster, it looks like they've brought in a new January edition in top 20 ITF junior recruit Vidmanova. So that's a huge addition for them. So should see her in action as well. They return that nucleus of Kowalski, Kopic, Leah Ma. So they got a lot of options. This originally, I think I probably wouldn't have had as this kind of tier 1 lock, assuming Georgia didn't have this new addition and Iowa had Alexa Noel. I probably would have put this in tier 2, but in the absence of Noel and with the additions of more talent on the Georgia side, I think they sweep through this.
Iowa or Mississippi State, who wins that matchup? Because again, we've talked about the highlight matchups. I should have done a better job. There are a lot of NCAA determining sort of matchups here, like Rice SMU. That feels incredibly valuable. Oregon Tulsa, and whomever plays in the loser, in the losers match, in the consolation match of that region. Ditto, by the way, for Florida Atlantic. Ditto, by the way, for Notre Dame, Colorado, Columbia. All of these teams, again, I guess that's my question here is who gets that 3rd win, who gets that consolation win amongst this group?
Well, I'll echo your sentiment and say in many ways that's kind of the feels like the B card, but it's actually the more interesting story in a lot of these regions, these 2-3 matchups or in the consolation matches. So who gets the 3rd win in terms of who wins?
Well, again, so the first 2 round winners, that's win 1, that's win 2. The consolation match is technically the 3rd match of the weekend. Yeah, that was poorly explained. Normally in a podcast, Westhoff would edit all of this out. We can leave it all in because we're on video now. Who gets that 3rd win, that consolation that also critical victory coming out of the weekend?
In the Georgia region?
Well, let's go through. I'm going to start Texas, Rice, SMU, Florida Atlantic. Just rock through this quickly.
All right.
I'm going to go SMU.
Okay, I'll go Rice.
All right, I like it. Oregon, Tulsa, Charlotte.
I'm going Oregon.
I'm going Oregon as well. Sorry, Charlotte. I'm going Oregon as well. Sorry, you like that note? Did I hit that well? Hey, I'll go Oregon as well. Notre Dame, Columbia, Colorado.
Notre Dame.
Coach Silverio got you in our interview, didn't she? Yeah, I'm a fan as well. I'll take the Irish, but I really like Colorado. I like what Coach Pham is doing. I'm just keep an eye on Colorado. All right, Iowa, Mississippi State, North Florida.
I'll go with Mississippi State here.
Does Iowa beat them in match number 1 or no?
No, I think Mississippi State gets that win.
Okay, interesting. All right, I like it. Well, then with that in mind, Georgia, obviously our other lock. Let's get to tier number 2. Let's start with that bubble team we were going to argue about, the UCLA Bruins, who, again, have lost a couple of faces off of this roster. And, for this team, it's still UCLA. There's still a ton of talent. They're still the heavy favorites over a Washington team that, by the way, not that far removed from a top 10 ranking, and is much healthier this season, has a bunch of the roster back this season, and sent me some fantastic gear over the course. Thank you, Coach. Yeah, I'm a big fan. And I'm immensely grateful for you doing that. I think that hat, by the way, is one of like 6 hats in the world large enough to fit my dad's head, which is a big deal in the Gruskin household. So again, thank you to you, Coach. But I think Washington is sneaky dangerous here. Like, they are healthy. They are experienced. I have no idea what the lineup for UCLA is going to look like beyond Forbes. I think I know who some of the faces are, but I have no idea who it is beyond like her and what the doubles combinations look like. UCLA is going to advance, but this is the first region where I think, 4-2, like in the cards.
Yeah. And so just to lift the veil, right? This was one I had in tier 1. I slept on it. I moved them to tier 2 because of the Washington angle here. We just haven't seen UCLA, right? And we know that they're going to start a lot of freshmen. So this weekend will be their first dual match debut, which is always, you can expect nerves. Washington's never beaten UCLA. It's something to note. So they're going to be looking for the upset, and this is a good opportunity for them. It is a dangerous Washington team. They have a strong top of the lineup. They've brought in some additions. Ultimately, I think if you're going to upset UCLA, this is a good chance to do it. But ultimately, I think UCLA does advance, 4-2. I like that score.
Yeah, no, I'm very, very excited again for this sort of matchup because I'm excited to see what this Washington team, if healthy and playing their best tennis, actually looks like. And, again, when you look at what this Washington team was able to do, again, what was it, 2019 that they were top 10, I want to say, in the country, something in another 2019 or 2018. And, there are still a few players back on this roster from that team. And to your point, they do add a couple of additions as well. And just, even Denver's always sneaky good. I think Washington gets by them. I'm actually interested for Denver Cal Poly because that's an interesting matchup again with NCAA implications. I'm curious who wins that one. Should I put on the hat? If I put on the hat, it's my upset prediction. If I do it, it's locked in.
It's NCAA football signing period.
That's what I'm saying.
Throw
I'm
off the Cracked Racquets hat.
Well, no one's seeing the bottom at the top of my head. So here's the thing. When you look at this UCLA roster, have we learned anything new about them over the past 6 weeks since we did our preview podcast, Jay, that makes you feel more certain about this team, more certain about, Alicia Bolton or anything associated with anything?
No, we just saw them in an individual tournament to start January. We hadn't seen Forbes, but we did see Bolton confirmation that she'll be playing. So no, we haven't learned anything new since we've done the preview pod.
Yeah. And, again, well, I guess we did learn Bolton's for sure coming back, and that's good to know. And, again, when Forbes and Bolton are your crutch, think Navarro and Subash over at Virginia as well. Think about Hamner and Ackley. It's just a good place to start fundamentally. I'm taking UCLA to advance. I imagine you are as well. That's why they're in tier number 2. Now, the two other ones, late additions to our tier 2 locks. We talked a lot about NC State already, so we can breeze through this one. They're hosting Northwestern, who beat them last year. They're hosting they beat them last year, right? I'm not crazy here.
No, Northwestern beat
they upset them because NC State was not at the 8-person national indoor field, and Wake Forest, who had as successful a fall doubles wise as any program, and just again the pressure they put on you. Once you're up 1-0, we know the depth right now across college tennis. Iowa State, unprecedented ITA regional success for them this season. It's a loaded region. Like all of these teams, in my opinion, are NCAA tournament bound, part A, which means fundamentally they're all top 45 teams, top 35 teams. And then I'm really excited, not as much for NC State. I think they are a lock to advance. I agree with you, but I want to see that consolation match. I want to see Iowa State versus whomever gets knocked out between Northwestern and Wake Forest, because that match might be the ultimate dogfight of the weekend. Like that one, the Texas A&M region, the Columbus region, which we'll get to momentarily. Those are the consolation matches where you're still fighting with the idea of maybe not top 16 on the line, but you're fighting with some serious stakes on the line.
Absolutely. And what I love about it is it's all those 2, 3, and 4 are all different conferences, right? So you start to kind of accumulate a ranked win over a non-conference opponent. That's what kind of, catapults you farther up in the rankings towards the end of the season, especially if you feel high on some of these teams, right? I do think Wake Forest is going to have a really strong season, Iowa State as well, right? So if you get a win over one of those two teams and their ranking continues to climb, you benefit from that the whole season. So that, you're right, that consolation match is going to be a dogfight and also have a lot of implications.
I also think the Big 12 is sneaky good. Not great, but sneaky good. Like, I think TCU is going to be better than they were last season in the mix to qualify for the NCAA tournament. Iowa State, obviously, in the mix. I'm expecting a bounce back year from Kansas. I'm expecting a bounce back year from Oklahoma State, who is perennially at the top. Texas Tech's always good. Baylor, 3 losses last season, 4 losses last season. Texas, Duke. Like, they were good last year. And so I just think that Big 12 is sneaky good. And if Iowa State can sneak in a win over an ACC conference foe as well, now you're starting to rack up high earned wins. And now maybe you're drawing the 15 seed, 16 seed instead of all of these seeds. So again, that NC State region, that said, pretty sure NC State's going to advance. And then our final, again, tier 2 sort of lock here, and they've earned it. Cal, who, if you beat Pepperdine, you're a tier 2 lock. And, again, Vanderbilt, San Diego, both very good teams. No disrespect to BYU, no disrespect to any of the teams in those region. But Cal just beat Pepperdine. Like, they're the lock here. What else are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, just that matchup between Vanderbilt and San Diego should be a really good one. Both teams, I think, are going to have better years this year than they did last year. BYU sneaky win over Baylor the other week,
Mm-hmm.
so look, they I don't think they will beat Cal, but it's just that makes the region interesting, particular in the consolation match. This is certainly not a BYU team that these teams will necessarily walk over. So it's a talented region. Cal, Vanderbilt, San Diego all have good top of the lineup players. So it'll be a fun one to watch, but Cal should advance pretty easily.
See, I was saving that nugget for right now. I was going to say, well, BYU did just beat Baylor, although perhaps that tells us more about the Baylor region when we get to it. But yeah, those are our locks for the weekend. 7 of them in all. Again, our tier 1, the top 4 seeds: Texas, North Carolina, Pepperdine, Georgia, UCLA. We expect to advance. NC State after their weekend to beat Ohio State, to beat Princeton the way they did. Yes, there's some decent, some solid squads. Actually, again, that's why they're tier 2 lock, because there's absolutely a world where Northwestern, Wake, or Iowa State could get them on the right day, but they've earned that distinction. Cal has earned that distinction. Let's flip gears though now. Let's talk about the upset alert. I apologize for framing it as hosts most likely to lose, but let's talk about who are those hosts that are most likely to lose, be upset on their home turf this region. There are a couple I've got in mind, Jay. Give me your opinions first.
So first and foremost, I think you got to look at Florida State. Florida State had a really great season last year, made the Elite Eight, has struggled with roster questions. So they only have 7 players on the roster right now. We saw them field a team of only 4 players this past weekend. I'm assuming that's because of COVID protocols. So we'll see. That's an open question, kind of what they field this weekend. But ultimately, I think they find themselves in a region with Florida as the number 2 seed, who I think has reloaded. They've brought in some transfers. I think this Florida team is going to be looking for a top 16 seed. And I think it starts with knocking off Florida State to advance to indoors.
To hear Coach Thornquist talk so openly about, the feeling around this Florida program and how they felt they had, fallen short after, a 2007 to 2015 run that was as impressive as any run you're going to see in women's college tennis history. And he just feels like whether it's the combination of the freshmen, the transfers they brought in, the experience they have now, Kessler at the top as well, that they've got a lot of pieces. And you're right. Literally the biggest difference between them and Florida State. Florida has a lot of pieces that you're curious about. I am curious about what the pieces are at Florida State, just foundationally, fundamentally. And I am a huge believer in Coach Hyde, and I want to be abundantly clear about that. But how can you pick them in this scenario? We just know more about the talent that the Gators possess. And yeah, with all due respect to Illinois, who I think is going to be better this season than they were last year. And I just think some things went wrong for them last season. And, FIU, who's going to be in the mix in that NCAA range. And if FIU, again, more critical than whomever plays, and there's a world perhaps where Illinois beats Florida State. But if FIU can get a win this weekend, boy, would that be huge for them come the NCAA tournament. I think Florida has to be the pick here. Again, I really tried to disagree with you. We just don't know enough about the Gators or about the Seminoles to not pick the Gators.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, that's upset number 1. Give me upset number 2.
Upset number 2 I have is Baylor. They are hosting a Miami and USC team that are very good. We just talked about this in the BYU in the Cal region, right? Baylor loses to BYU. Granted, they don't have their number 1 player from last year, Mel Krywaj, in the lineup for that, but they have a lot of pieces on that lineup, and they rolled most of those pieces out, and they lost to BYU kind of fair and square there. And Miami, USC, these are teams that there are you can be pretty high on. I think particularly USC, you feel really good about that USC top 3 of Cayetano, Salma Ewing, and Snow Han, right? Definitely some questions about their bottom half of the lineup. I think they rolled out a few lineups this past weekend that weren't super successful or were less than successful than you would hope against some competition. So I think that 2-3 matchup is going to be really close between Miami and USC. And I think ultimately the winner has a really good shot to knock off Baylor and Waco.
Yeah, I mean, look, you mentioned it, to have Cayetano, to have Selma Ewing, to have Snow Han, it just gives you a margin for error that other teams don't possess there. And that top three is good as any top three in the country. And I do think Coach Swain finally has the depth where she wants it to be. I think she's got options now, 4, 5, 6 in ways she didn't maybe in her first couple of seasons. She talked openly in our podcast with her about finding her bearings and learning how to recruit USC versus how she recruited Williams throughout the course of her career. Miami, obviously, with the addition of Noel, which we talked about when it happened next year, that team, whoo, fascinating. This year, they've added some pieces. It still feels like they're a player short. I will say this, the 2019 Kansas team that won the Big 12 championship is one of my favorite teams, just like quietly throughout the course of the past few seasons. Just the ability, it felt like there are a lot of pieces on that team I enjoyed. This team is not that for Kansas, but like that is no cakewalk, in my opinion, in this opening match of the region. Like, I really do think Kansas can give Baylor a run for their money. And then, I agree with you. I think USC advances past Miami. I think they're just the best team top to bottom, match calculus wise, whatever way you want to look at it. I guess my hot take out of this region is, might Baylor go 0-2?
I would be surprised. You just that was a bad loss to BYU.
Yeah,
that should not happen.
It's a wake up call.
Yeah, that's a wake up call. I had to double check, like, who lost what match. They have the talent there on that roster, so I think, and particularly at home, they don't want to go 0-2, but I do think they fall in the second round.
That's exactly it. I think Baylor, because they're at home, gets over that 4-3. I think Kansas plays them extraordinarily close. I think Miami gets a good win over Kansas to wrap up that region. Your last upset, though, Jay.
Well, upset, interesting, firecracker region, got to go to Ohio State. I think this,
for the record, this was our runner-up for most interesting region. Like, if we could have gone 1A, 1B, super producer Westhoff was like, I need you more structured than that. So we added some structure, and you see the beautiful graphics as such. But yeah, this Ohio State region is just,
yeah, it's probably the only one where if you told me any of these 4 teams advanced, I would believe you, right? There's a case to be made for all of those teams, particularly on the heels of Ohio State going 0-2, right? Granted, they lost to a Duke team, they lost to an NC State team, both very good teams, but it doesn't get easier, right? And I think a sneaky upset here is Oklahoma State over Ohio State in that round 1. This Oklahoma State team has clearly reloaded. They've got a lot of talent. I think they match up pretty well with Ohio State. So I think if Ohio State can get through Oklahoma State and play the winner of Tennessee or LSU, it could be Tennessee. I think the winner of the 1-4 matchup actually advances here.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Again, do I have Ohio State on upset alert? Maybe not quite yet. And I want to talk about this region. I want to offer you my thoughts. Just to finish the thing on upsets, is Georgia Tech on here? Is UCF on here? Like, UCF's an interesting one to me. You maybe throw up here in this graphic.
Well, how long is the list?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Right. To me, and how much of it is an upset if Georgia Tech loses to Michigan? Slight, right?
Say that again, one more time. Sorry, my connection broke up.
It is a slight upset, but would still be an upset on paper, right? Compared to like Florida State, particularly coming off the season they had. So the reality is parity is the name of the game. So a lot of these regions, you could see the top seed upset. These are the 3 that, if I was to bet, these are where I would put some money on versus, a 1-2 matchup in Michigan, Ohio State, or Michigan,
you stake the reputation. I get it. Now, the LSU program to me is just interesting because I just I'm not exactly sure what I should expect coming into this season. There's just a lot of moving pieces and just a lot of different things going on. And, again, I think when you look at that Ohio State region, I think it was really good for the Buckeyes to go down to Duke, to NC State, and lose 4-3 matches, but in away matches, and just kind of be like, we're not doing that at home. Like, that is not going to fly for us. We have that fire in our bellies. Tennessee's magic right now, and they found 4 singles wins after dropping a doubles point. And, again, I do think Oklahoma State, Chris Young is very confident he's got a good team on his hands this year down in Stillwater. And I think that matters. But that's why I kind of like that the Buckeyes lost 4-3 against Duke and NC State this weekend, is they're ready for that Oklahoma State challenge. And I think getting through that one ultimately helps them get through the next test. And I just think they take doubles against LSU and Tennessee, and then good luck finding 3 singles wins against anyone. I like doubles for Ohio State the best in the region. I like Kontos probably best at the number 1 singles position in the region. That's why I roll with the Buckeyes. Those are the 2 most known quantities, but you're right. Like, and again, talk about in terms of chasing a top 16 position and being a host site, regardless of, yes, LSU, Tennessee, inherently valuable because they are 17 and 18 right now in the rankings, and they're going to get another shot at one another come the SEC tournament, and to split those matches just helps them invariably. But that consolation match, whether it is Ohio State getting upset by Oklahoma State or a hungry Oklahoma State team against whomever loses LSU, Tennessee, that's another one you just circle as a dog eat dog. We are going for top 16 seeding sort of matchup.
Yeah, and these teams are all just so close. I think one thing to note for Oklahoma State, they did not have Alana Wolfberg in that match against Princeton. If she is in the lineup, that's an upset alert for me with Ohio State. I am pretty hot, particularly given the questions that arose for me with Ohio State's depth in this past weekend against NC State, against Duke. That's an open question, but I do think the Buckeyes advance. I agree with you. Doubles and 1 is going to get them probably 2 points on the board. But again, those matches at 2, 3, and that consolation match are going to pay off come May.
Yeah, these are all great reasons to watch. And again, let's get to the best of the rest, the ones we have yet to touch on thus far. You look here at the options available to us. We'll start, I'd say, with Georgia Tech, the Georgia Tech region. You look there, Georgia Tech, Michigan, Ole Miss, Old Dominion. Now, Kenya Jones, Vicky Flores, who had been the core of that Georgia Tech team for so long, they're both gone. I still think there's some talent on Coach Harmon's roster, but I just kind of like this Michigan team a little bit better. I like the experience there, whether it be Kari Miller or just, again, Serdon, Jaden Brown, obviously my little sister, Julia Fliegner as well in the mix. I think Michigan's very good. I think we should win this region.
Yeah, it's going to be a new Georgia Tech team, right? You lose that top 2, not necessarily that it'll all be new faces. We've seen a lot of these faces before at the bottom of the lineup. They'll have to step up. They certainly have the benefit of playing at home against Michigan, but that's going to be a very close 1-2 matchup, which is why I don't have it really on upset alert, because to me, it could go either way, and either one would make sense. But Michigan in particular looked pretty good in their fall invites that they've played so far. They've gotten a lot of victories from just a lot of different people. I'm not sure we've landed on the lineup necessarily, but you feel pretty good about whoever plays anywhere for Michigan.
You ready for the hot take? Old Dominion over Georgia Tech.
I was going to say, yeah. I mean, that's a great one. You got to feel like they feel good about doubles.
Yeah.
Right.
They probably would imagine.
Yeah. They feel good about probably 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Got to find one more. That's certainly viable.
It's my upset alert there because, again, it's a very young Georgia Tech team, even if they are quite talented. You get to some of the other regions, again, we've yet to touch on. I want to get to the Shaolin Showdowns, as I call them, the matches. We are very much looking forward to that 1-2 thriller in the second day of the region. Last one would be UCF Auburn. And Arizona State, obviously, UC Santa Barbara. By the way, I didn't list it there. Georgia Tech hosting Michigan, hosting Ole Miss, hosting Old Dominion. Here at UCF, it's Auburn, Arizona State, UC Santa Barbara coming down to Orlando to play the Golden Knights. I mean, Coach Kanyeko's team really should have beaten Duke last year. Like, it felt like they had that match from a momentum standpoint, let it slip away. Now some new faces on the board now for the Knights. I think they advance, but I'm not very sure.
I mean, they barely beat Penn. The other day. Granted, they didn't have Zaleva at 1, so that's an open question. Auburn struggled against Furman as well. They advanced 4-3. This is probably the weakest region of the 15 in terms of kind of the top teams here. You lean UCF, it's at home. If they get Zaleva back in the lineup, you feel like they have the pieces to win. Auburn hasn't been super impressive. So, you You lean UCF in Lake Nona and get the win there. But
Yeah.
a lot of questions for UCF moving forward.
Very much agree with you. I would say of the regions, that's probably, and I say this lovingly to UCF, every region inherently entertaining. Now, you know what? I'll still watch it because I need to learn about this UCF team because I do think there are some pieces there for us to monitor. All right. Last but not least, the Shaolin Showdowns. Now, all due respect to Furman and Nebraska, I think we know as we look towards Durham, Duke, Oklahoma, collision course, round of 32. Which way you leaning, Jay?
I've been high on this Oklahoma team.
This is your squad.
Since the beginning of the year. It was a big blow for them to lose Dana Guzman. I've been impressed with them. I think they carry that momentum that they had, wins over Princeton, a few other wins, and I think that they pull off the upset in Durham.
Here's what I will say right now. I can hear Coach Cohen screaming at us saying, Furman is very good. Like, we are not looking past Furman.
They don't have to because we can.
Yeah.
That's our job.
Exactly. It's the depth. It's the depth this Oklahoma team has and the experience that they bring into this match as well, that it is Jackson and it is, I'm missing one of the other Emmas. The other
Ellie Coleman.
Ellie Coleman, excuse me. Yeah, Ellie Coleman and Emma Jackson. And just, again, we saw one victory from them over the course of the weekend, but to ask them to come up against this Oklahoma team that is riding some confidence now with a couple of early season victories. We got a question from Sports Fanatics asking how much does it hurt LSU to have not played a match coming into this kickoff weekend? I think it hurts every team to have not played a match coming into this weekend. Now, here's the difference. These two teams are both tested. Duke got, those freshmen did get a look at tight action. I still think Oklahoma is their toughest test to date. Here's what it comes down to. Drummy, Beck, Chen, or the top three of Oklahoma, or the depth, or 4, 5, 6 of Oklahoma. Who do you view as the more dominant of the two? I think Duke gets the edge in doubles, and then I like the experience of the Duke top three just a little bit better. So I take Duke in crunch time, and it's at home. It's in Durham at Duke. The comfort of that, and to be indoors as well. Not that Oklahoma doesn't play indoor tennis. But I'm taking the Blue Devils to advance. National indoors is always where they're dangerous. I say they beat Oklahoma. I still think this is lock it in 4-3.
Yeah, I don't know if I buy taking them Duke in doubles. I think Oklahoma has looked strong in doubles. They have a lot of different pieces. The Corley sisters.
Corley's at the top too. Yeah, that's true. Versus back in. Who's back play with Billiken? Man, that's a fun matchup.
Yeah. And so Oklahoma's look good in doubles. I got to favor Oklahoma at the bottom of the lineup, particularly 5 and 6. 4 is probably going to be a close match, whether it is Chen, whether it is Emma Jackson. To me, yes, Duke has the home court advantage. I think if Oklahoma can get one of the top 3, and if they can figure out where they play Lainey Sleeth versus Ivana Corley, they can get a win there. They probably won't get a win at 1. They can get doubles and they can get 2 of the bottom 3. That's their match calculus. You feel good about it. They've done it before. So this could be one of the host upsets for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to put on the board. The other one I think we have to put on there, and this might be the showdown of showdowns, Virginia, Stanford, the battle for Jay's heart. You look obviously at this, and again, no disrespect to the other teams in the region. Arkansas, how big a believer I am in Coach Sanchez Quintanar and what she's building down there. James Madison would be huge for them to escape the weekend with a win over this Arkansas team. But I think we know which direction the region's heading. And look, you get the number 1 player in the country in Emma Navarro. And in my opinion, the best.
You mean an unranked player in the country?
Yeah, you're correct. The defending NCAA champion, unranked Emma Navarro, and Natasha Subash is arguably, if not definitively, the number 1-2 singles punch in the nation, of course. They've got plenty of new pieces coming in as well to fill up the bottom of those lineup. And last year was doubles, Navarro, Subash, Rosie Johansson, who seemed to be the recipe for the Who's. How do they replace that 4th point here this season? A lot of new freshmen in the mix, but you want to talk talented new freshmen? Connie Ma, Yepa Fanova, this Stanford roster, who we recently learned, Jay, no Michaela Gordon, it looks like, for them here in 2022. In the end, I think she opts not to return for an additional season. That's certainly a loss for this
Yes.
Stanford roster. She was, the number one singles player for them these past couple of years. And, my hot take was to take them as the NCAA finalists. I still feel really good about this team, but now it goes from, well, you really just need one of Ma and Yepifanova to click in those top three positions to, all right, now you're asking a little bit more of the freshmen. And right away, it's probably going to be Ma, Yepifanova, Navarro, Subash. Like, come on now, best of the rest.
Yeah, this is a tough region, right? These are two teams that could very well both be top 10 teams. We have them as top 10 teams. Losing Gordon hurts. That was kind of going to be the linchpin between the top of the lineup and the lower half. One thing to note, UVA hasn't played Subash. I think maybe injuries, maybe COVID protocols, but she was out in some of the dual matches they played. We did see Navarro in action. So, we saw Elaine Travinsky play up towards top of the lineup for UVA. This is going to be a battle. I've leaned UVA this entire time. I'm going to stick with UVA for the reason alone of, one, this is not an indoor Stanford team, right? Stanford has struggled indoors in the past. And even just the makeup of their current lineup, you look at some of the players that they're going to have in the bottom of the lineup, not exactly indoor players, right? Not a ton of power at that bottom of the lineup, a lot of, defenders. Question for me is, what does UVA's lineup look like? Who is playing 4, 5, and 6? But again, I just think with doubles, Navarro, Shubas, they're going to get 2 of the top 3 with Travinsky. I'm feeling less positive about Connie Ma than maybe I was after the fall nationals, given some of her losses that she took in Vegas a few weeks ago. So I'm feeling good about the Who's here, and we'll see. It's going to be a great match.
I'm pretty sure I predicted Stanford to win. And with that in mind, Westhoff, let's go to our predictions here as we get towards the end of today's show. Just to recap everything we've talked about in our 15 regions. You can see them up here on the board. Westhoff, you can put this in the chat. I believe I picked Stanford to advance over Virginia, even knowing what I knew about Michaela Gordon, because again, I had to find some area to disagree with you. It's a depth thing. Like, just give me the 4, 5. Again, it's a similar question to what we asked. Who do you feel better about, the top 3 of Virginia or the 4, 5, 6 of Stanford? You talked me into it. This is the problem here. I'm now thinking it might be the Virginia train, and that's what I should have picked in the region. But you see it on the board, and once it's on the board, it's locked. So your predictions, again, we both have Texas, UNC, Pepperdine, Georgia advancing. We have UCLA, NC State as well. We both have Florida advancing over Florida State. I have Duke. You have Oklahoma. I have Stanford. You have Virginia. I guarantee you Jay's going to end up right on both accounts. I picked Michigan. You picked Georgia Tech. That's interesting to me. I like that. In the end, we both pick UCF. We both pick Ohio State. We both have Cal. Both have USC. Both have Texas A&M. Oh, man. I'm nervous, Jay. I'm nervous looking at that board. I'm like, I'm not really going to lose by 2 to them in the 2 places we significantly disagree. Yeah, just any final reflections, any final thoughts, any final lineup questions, things you'll be looking out that we didn't get the chance to touch on today. We hit it all.
We hit it all. We hit every region.
Aren't these easier to listen to than be a part of now that you're on the other side?
Yeah, they're tough. Although what I like about the regions is their structure to it, right? It's like, okay, the one that is very difficult is when you have to come up with like a top 10 ranking, and it's just like anyone can go anywhere. But no, overall, I think we've talked about it. I think we've talked about it all. The biggest lineup question for me is Georgia, with the addition of Vidmanova, who we'll need to see who is in the lineup for Virginia. Do we see Shubas? Georgia Tech, we haven't seen it all. What's that lineup look like? And other than that, I think we've seen most of these teams. So I'm excited. I hope I beat you.
I hope you do as well. I'm upset with myself because you just brought something up and I forgot to tell Westhoff we need a top 10 graphic, and therefore we're not going to do top 10 poll this week. We're going to save it till next week after the kickoff weekend for our first Crack Rackets top 10 poll. That will be a staple of this show moving forward as well. But let us gather some data. This is the ceremonial kickoff weekend. We will have our ceremonial Crack Rackets first top 10 poll of the season following it. But some good news for all of you listeners. we're going to have some action covered for you here on our Cracked Racquets YouTube channel throughout the course of the weekend. We are thrilled to announce our sites that we will be covering here in our Redzone coverage of the ITA Kickoff Weekend. The sites you can see on screen: NC State, all of the intrigue there; Iowa State, Northwestern. How does Wake Forest look as well? Those schools going to be on our broadcast. Guess what? We get that Ohio State region as well. Ohio State, LSU, Tennessee, Oklahoma State. Of course, we're fortunate to get that Duke-Oklahoma match. We'll get all of the intrigue down in Baylor as well. A couple of things in the works. I'm working my derriere off to get Texas A&M because I want to see all the aspects of that as well on the women's side. And then, of course, we've got more announcements for you in the men's sites we'll be hosting over the course of the weekend as well. But again, NC State women, Ohio State women, Duke women, Baylor women, all of the action in those regions going to be covered here on our Cracked Racquets YouTube channel. We will be tuned in from start to finish throughout the day, first ball to last, as we try to provide all of you college tennis fans with the kickoff weekend experience you deserve. With all that said, Jay, any final thoughts before we wrap today's show? Any final kickoff weekend thoughts? How much stamina you got left in the tank, my friend? You got one more big weekend in you?
I'm looking forward to it. Those are great 4 sites. That was news to me, so I'm excited for those. If you could only choose 4, I mean, those are some of the 4 best. So really excited for that. Really excited to just kick this off. So many questions. I just hope to see some really good tennis. I think we will.
I'm very grateful for the fact that it's the second weekend of the Australian Open, because if I had to do this in third rounds and all of that nonsense, my brain might explode. But only to have to monitor 1-2 Australian Open matches to be able to lock in on the college tennis. It's the perfect, weaning off of the heavy tennis action of the Australian Open. It's like, don't worry, we still got one more jam-packed weekend for you in the kickoff. And again, 15 fantastic regions on the women's side, 15 fantastic regions on the men's side as well, which we will be breaking down on this edition of the Deciding Point, a Thursday edition, of the Deciding Point, with the lesser Holy Trinity members, Chris Halioris, Matt Stakowiak as well. But again, weekly episodes of the Deciding Point. That's our commitment to all of you college tennis fans. Hopefully all of you will continue to send in questions, and to any we didn't answer, I apologize. Scotty B, you asked about Fernanda Lebrana. She has transferred. That is why she is no longer on the Texas roster. She will be playing this spring. I'm getting to the tidy filing up of final questions here, Jay.
That's news to me about Lebrana.
Oh, I thought Lebrana was... that she's not on the Texas roster?
Well, I knew that. I didn't know I thought she just left.
I thought she transferred. Am I crazy here? I thought she transferred somewhere. All right, you know what? I got to double check on that, Scotty B. Westhoff, leave it in.
Confirm the sources.
But cut it out of the podcast edition. No, because I thought I saw her on the Miami roster, to be honest. But maybe I'm crazy here. Maybe I'm losing my brain. Again, unconfirmed. So this is why we'll worry about that later.
This is what you get an hour and a half into the show.
Yeah, I hope we answered. This is why I didn't answer the question, because I was like, who was it? Who did he ask about? Again, juiciest kickoff weekend. I think we answered all the questions. Sports fanatics, Scotty B, the entire crew. Shout out to your questions. We are immensely grateful to any coaches, players who tuned in. Thank you as well. Shout out to the man on the 1s and 2s, Daniel Westhoff. I mean, look at the job he did. It's like we're doing a real studio show here right now. I feel like I'm in the box. I'm trying to break out. Let me get out of here. A shout out to you, super producer Daniel Westhoff, for keeping us inside the box and allowing us to take our production to the next level. With all that said, kickoff weekend around the corner. Ohio State, Baylor, we've got Duke, we've got so much fantastic action, NC State as well here on the women's side, plenty of men's action to cover as well. We hope you'll stick with us throughout the course of the weekend. We'll hope you'll join us not only Thursday night for the men's recap, but each and every week as we all celebrate the 2022 college tennis season. With all of that said, for my fantastic co-host, John J. Parsons, our super producer, Daniel Westhoff, and all of us here at both Cracked Racquets and the Tennis Channel Podcast Network, I'm your host, Alex Gruskin. Jay, what do we tell the people?
Hey, great shot.
And we will see you all on Thursday. Thanks, everyone.